mindfulness, corporates, and our careers. How do those three things come together just as a starting point of discussion?
When you do start to operate your organizations in this way, it also creates things like psychological safety and trust that begins to make the ecosystem places where people feel like they belong and they want to stay.
So there's this tension between the me and the we. How do we address that?
When we are raised with a me focus, what comes out of that? This is faulty thinking that is toxic. We can use a practice of mindfulness to keep us aware of the common good.
I'm telling you, Michelle, you're making my mind race. I'm getting super excited here. Hi, from Round Glass, this is Living with Sunny. I'm your host, Sunny Singh. Today we have a wonderful guest, Michelle Maldonado. She participated in our World Meditation Day and very quickly became the favorite of all. So we are so delighted to have a conversation with Michelle. Michelle, welcome to Living with Sunny.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
You are a mindfulness teacher and emotional intelligence teacher. You talk about how we can apply mindfulness in business, in our careers. So tell us, just at a broad stroke, mindfulness, corporates, and our careers. How do those three things come together just as a starting point of discussion?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And there is this sort of myth about what mindfulness is. And I think that people conflate meditation, mindfulness meditation, with the act, the state of being mindful. And they are two separate things. One is a tool to help cultivate our capacity to be fully present, to be attentive. That's mindfulness. And so when I think about what does that look like in the work context, and that's whether it's corporates, it's government, it's academia, nonprofits, NGOs, whatever space or place we may find ourselves in, being mindful means that you are aware and paying attention to what's happening in the mind, the body, because both of those things give lots of information to us. And then taking that and looking at what's happening in our surrounding environment.
Michelle, if you look at corporates today, and you deal with a bunch of them, and you are probably hearing about a lot more of them, where are they in implementing mindfulness practices with their associates, with their employees? Are you on the right track, or are they misguided?
Funny enough, I would say all of the above. So we have organizations and people at different stages and phases, different places in this journey. So there are some organizations that are just beginning to kind of say, you know what, our employees are really stressed. They're burning out. We're losing people. And when you start to lose people repeatedly, that starts to hit the bottom line, because what we know from a revenue standpoint, from an operational standpoint, the cost of onboarding and training is quite expensive. And the higher you go in levels of leadership, the more expensive that is. This concept of taking care of ourselves. I actually need some time off today for my mental health. We call it a sort of mental health day or what have you. We're starting to see more and more of that permissible. Now, in terms, so there are some that are in the beginning stages of that, but then there are those who have kind of hit the ground running, and they've been doing it for years. And a good one is SAP. They have a chief mindfulness officer in Peter Bosselman, who has not only created a program around mindfulness, but has threaded it through their headquarters and throughout all of their organization, and also created metrics to measure impact. Now, measuring the impact of mindfulness is kind of like measuring the impact of marketing, right? So much goes into these things, and there's no one thing that you can say that, that's what made that revenue jump, or that's what made the people stay. It's an aggregated thing. But what we're finding is that when you do start to operate your organizations in this way, that these become the natural default ways of being that then inform how they do what they do. And it also creates things like psychological safety and trust and cultural competencies that begins to make the organizations and ecosystem places where people feel like they belong and they want to stay.
A couple of things, Michelle. You referred to a chief mindfulness officer like SAP does have, or whatever the title might be. And then we are living in a culture where we are talking online and people are working online. So number one, what does a chief mindfulness officer or the equivalent person or role in a company does? What is his or her responsibilities? And on the second side is now this person has to deal with this hybrid culture, this remote culture, this online culture, which is how do you get mindfulness done when you don't have that feeling of interacting and the energy fields that intersect when you are in person with people working in an office? Shed some light on this for us.
There's a quote that I'm fond of referencing by the late Maya Angelou, who says that people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And this is the challenge that we have working in a virtual environment. Can I feel you? So in the virtual world, we might have to ask more questions because we can't see. And so it might be, I have a dear friend that has this expression that just says basically, ask more questions instead of making more telling statements. So that's the first piece. Is in the virtual spaces, we have to start to learn how do we fine tune our awareness in the virtual spaces and begin to engage in that way. The second part, what does a chief mindfulness officer or someone in that kind of role do to help cultivate that environment, that culture, that climate, with mindfulness being the tool or the presence? And I think again, it depends on where the organization is. And sometimes you might start with creating spaces for pause or quiet. Some places call them serenity rooms or just sort of pause rooms. Going beyond that, they can help facilitate, maybe it's brown bag luncheons, maybe it's a pilot to introduce the concepts to people. Because as I said in the beginning of our conversation, there's so much that people think mindfulness is that it really isn't. And then that there are different types of mindfulness. There's secular mindfulness, which is where I tend to sort of operate. We also have to remember that no one owns mindfulness, that everyone has the ability to participate in. Every religion has a contemplative practice, and every secular kind of spiritual sort of group also has ways to be in contemplative practice. So if we can kind of figure out as an organization, as that chief mindfulness officer or whatever, what is the expression of it that also supports the people in the organization, that is an important part of this strategy. The other thing they can do is let people know that there's no right or wrong way, that there is no perfection in meditating or in being mindful. And then the final thing I think that I would mention is that in order for it to take roots and have legacy, many of the executives are going to want to know, why should we bother? How does that, if they're a publicly traded company or anyone that's sort of answering to the board or answering to Wall Street, they're going to say, why should we dedicate money to that? And so people in those roles helping to cultivate a mindful environment have to understand that language as well, so that you can get buy-in.
Another dynamics, Michelle, that plays in the corporate world is everybody's so self-consumed and absorbed. Not everybody, but people are in their careers. Like, when do I get to the next grade, the next title? How do I progress my career? And that's almost front and center in their mind a lot of times, or most of the times. Now, this is the me, like what's in it for me? Where is me going? And then there is a collective we, that there is a community, the community of associates you work with in your team in the greater organization for a cause, for a problem you're solving. And so there is this tension between the me and the we. How do we address that? And how can mindfulness or some of these practices assist us in understanding the me, the place of me in we, and that why does the we matter and should matter?
It absolutely matters. So many of us were raised with, what do I do to get ahead? What do I do to get successful? There wasn't really a cultivation of the we, particularly in the United States. It was all about, how do I get ahead? How do I succeed? How do I do better? So when we are raised with a me focus, what comes out of that? Well, faulty thinking that there are always just going to be winners and losers, and that for me to win, you've got to lose. And if you win, that means I'm losing. This is faulty thinking that is toxic to the very fabric of our common humanity. So we can use something as a tool, a practice of mindfulness meditation, to keep us aware of the common good, of our interconnectedness and our interdependence. And when we do that, we allow the doors to open for compassion to be present. And the way I look at it is compassion is empathy in action. And we're always asking ourselves in the midst of feeling empathy, moving it into action and compassion is asking the simple question of what would serve here, what would serve the highest good. And when we can do that, it starts to shake away some of that hardened shell of it's just about me or I'm all alone in this. There's nobody that understands. And when we can realize that everybody is going through something you know nothing about, the practice of mindfulness helps keep us present and also aware. I referenced earlier what's happening in the body and the mind. So we can say, ooh, when that happened, I noticed that my chest got tighter. I started to tense up, and I realized that's because it touched that spot in me that felt like I need to be the big one in the room, or that should have been me, or how come I'm not getting that kind of acknowledgement, or oh, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's like I really took up all the oxygen in the room today. I didn't even give anybody else time to shine. And so when we can practice mindfulness, and there are two ways we can do that in what we call dedicated practices and integrated practices. And here's what I offer as a way to think of the two. A dedicated practice is, say you get up in the morning and your practice, your habit is to get up, take a shower, get dressed, and then you sit in the chair by the window for however many minutes, say 10 minutes. And then you start your day. That's dedicated. You set aside the time, you dedicate the time to do it. But the dedicated practices become the fuel for the integrated moments of mindfulness during the day. So, an integrated example could be you have a very tough meeting to walk into. And every time you have the meeting, maybe this is a monthly meeting, maybe it's a weekly meeting with a one-on-one, and you know it never really goes well. An integrated practice that pulls from the well that you develop from your dedicated practices allows you to think, okay, before I walk in there, I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to set an intention for how I show up. Or I'm going to set an intention for how I'm going to offer something. Or I'm going to set an intention to listen today more than talk. And so those are integrated moments that draw upon the fuel that's generated in the dedicated practice. And just briefly, I will say that sometimes we confuse culture and climate. And meditation, being mindfulness, the two together can help us understand the nuanced difference. And culture is just simply the accepted behaviors, norms, all of that. And climate is how it feels to move with and through and in the culture. And if the climate doesn't feel good to us, then that culture is not for us. If the climate feels great, we think the culture is great. And so mindfulness can help generate the awareness. So again, we can be more skillful in how we show up, how we respond, and the actions we take or don't take.
I'm telling you, Michelle, you're making my mind race. I'm telling you, you have so many great ideas, so many great narratives. It is, I'm getting super excited here. In the corporate world, intentions versus action. So, I often say, if you're thinking something, if you want to communicate, you think something, you say it, one degree of abstraction, the other person listens to you, and then they interpret. So there's always, and then if you look at in the enterprise and you trickle it down from the leader to top down, imagine what the person was thinking at the top, and then by the time it trickles down to 2, 3, 4 levels down, what are they really hearing? And we always are focused on our intention. Our intention is good. Our intention is this. But what is the unintended consequences, the collateral benefit and damage, good and bad, positive and negative, of the actions that we take, and study those, and then reconcile with the intention? That's a big deal.
It sure is, because you hit the nail right on the head. We're like, well, I didn't intend that. That wasn't my intention. But there are three things at play, right? There's the intention, there's the action, and then there's the impact. And so as humans, we want to be judged based on our intentions. But also as humans, what do? We judge others based on their impact. We must always go back and assess and reassess and assess again, what is the impact? And the impact may be desirable on day one, but then conditions change. And on day 35, it's no longer working. And we've got to shift again. And so that may also require us not only to shift what we do, but also to have another conversation, to re-communicate or to communicate the new intention and action that aligns with what the new conditions are.
You mentioned compassion is empathy in motion. And when you're talking about that, it struck me that we always say exhibit and show compassion to others, right? How about compassion for the self? How about you love yourself so that you can actually be a better and a more powerful contributing factor to the we?
Now, I love, love, love that because we cannot give what we don't have. We cannot give from an empty well, and we cannot sustainably give when we're working on fumes. Giving to ourselves first not only is not selfish, but it's one of the greatest gifts we can give to ourselves and the world and the people around us, because then we are coming and giving and offering from a place of replenished resources. Just like we're not taught to think about the we, we're also not taught to think about, what do I need? How do I think about loving myself? I was never taught about this concept of loving myself. So I remember being in my late 30s. I was reflecting on an exercise I'd done in high school. And in high school, our teacher in our health class said, take out a piece of paper and write down the numbers 1 through 5. And then on each line, put the people you love most in your world. Yeah. And so we all did. And then he asked how many people had put themselves on the list.
Wow.
And then he asked how many people had put themselves first on the list. And I didn't realize at the time how powerful and important that was. But then in my late 30s, it kind of circled back to me. And I thought, I don't really know if I love myself. I don't, because I've never really thought about it. Do I? I mean, some of the ways that I treat myself, the way that I exhaust myself and give when I don't have anything to give, is that self-love? It is very hard to be kind and compassionate when you feel like ick, right? Because that's what you're working with. And so it takes a lot of energy to treat others the opposite of how you feel about yourself. And so, Sunny, that's what I say. Self-love is the first place to start, and it is the most important place to start.
Very well said. In the very beginning, you're the founder of Lucencia. Tell us, what does Lucencia do?
Lucencia is, we do everything from consulting to training to coaching. It's resting on a base of things like mindfulness and emotional intelligence and cultural competence and psychological safety and neuroscience, because people also have to understand the biology of why we tend to do the things we do. So I work with everything from, UN folks to law enforcement to tech to retail to academia. And people often ask me all the time, well, what's your niche? What's your specialty? Who's your audience? And I just say humans, because we are everywhere and we show up with all of who we are. And the gift that I'm trying to offer through my work is having people understand where they are in relation to how they wish they would show up. And also understanding that there is nothing broken about you, that we are all full humans and we're just at different stages and phases of our lives and on these journeys. And so, but we get to choose how we show up in the next moment. We just don't always know what tools to use to do that.
This work you're doing is highly, highly relevant, Michelle, and so glad that you're doing it and doing it so well. I have to say, what an endearing, insightful, what a great conversation, among the best I've had.
You are very kind, and I'm glad that you are having conversations, because I also think that in conversations like this, it starts to get people inspired to have their own conversations.
Michelle, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this conversation. For our listeners, if you want to know more about Michelle Maldonado, go to her site, lucencia.com. It is spelled as LUCENSCIA.com, lucencia.com. So you can also find more about her on a World Meditation Day content on roundglass.com. Michelle, thank you. This is Roundglass. We are Holistic Wellbeing. I am Sunny Singh, and I am Holistic Wellbeing. We want to hear from you. If you have any feedback, if you have any questions, please do write to us at livingwithsunny@roundglass.com. Thank you for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. See you next time.